I said it before when we were wondering which Ed was best, and I'm gonna say it again here. Eddie is my favorite character in Ed, Edd n Eddy. To be fair, he doesn't have a lot of competition because there's what, 12 characters maybe? Still though, Eddie's my guy.
That's my name.
And if you know anything about me or my personal tastes, this shouldn't come as a shock at all. My favorite characters are always the ones with a ton of layers. Ones that you can discuss and analyze for hours and hours and it never gets old. Like Clay Puppington in Moral Oral or Kenny McCormick in South Park. Ed, Edd n Eddy's a comedy show, and purely a comedy show at that. So it goes without saying that it's not going to be as deep as those shows, but by comedy show standards, Eddie has quite a lot to him. In order to get into the meat of the character, we have to look at Eddie's surroundings. How does he interact with the other characters in the cul-de-sac? And when we figure that out, we can start taking a look at the number one issue that drives Eddie as a character, even if we didn't really learn it until the finale. Firstly, let's start with his best friends, the other Eds, Ed and Double D. Ed is a big, lovable oaf that, in all honesty, provides a classic cartoon trope to his and Eddie's dynamic. The big, stupid guy and the small, yappy guy is a trope as old as time itself. Or at least cartoons. Actually, now that I think of it, it dates back even before cartoons. Have you seen Abbott and Costello? Ed is basically willing to do anything that Eddie says, and Eddie knows it full well. That means whenever their scam has some dirty work involved, Eddie will always make Ed do it, and Ed will always do it with a smile on his face, even if he doesn't exactly do it correctly.
What?
But yeah, that's kind of half of Eddie and Ed's interactions, is Eddie bossing Ed around and Ed being totally cool with it. The other half is them poking fun at others or getting in trouble because, let's face it, they have a very similar sense of humor. Which is good. Eddie kinda needs somebody to laugh with, but more on that later. Then there's his other best friend, Ed with 2 Ds, or Double D as his friends call him. Double D is way smarter than Ed could ever hope to be, but his personal flaw is that he's way too much of a pushover. He'll let Eddie push him around with basically no consequence.
Thank you. I needed that.
No matter how hard Double D objects to Eddie's schemes, he always goes right along with it, and then when Eddie gets punished, Double D gets dragged down right along with him. Seems kinda strange, doesn't it? Eddie has 2 best friends, but he doesn't seem to treat either of them very well. One of them is his whipping mule, and the other one is his, smarter whipping mule. But how does it get for the rest of the cast? Well, first off, there's Kevin. Kevin is basically Eddie's arch enemy. When you get down to it, Kevin is basically a more successful Eddie. Kevin thinks he's way cooler than everybody else, is generally overconfident, and is a jerk to those around him, especially his quote-unquote friends. Kevin is kind of the neighborhood cool kid. Even if you don't necessarily like him, you always want to be seen with him because it's going to give you that much more credibility. When you put 2 people with that exact personality together, there's going to be some explosions. There's going to be a lot of trouble. Eddie can never let Kevin one-up him, and whenever he's out there to torment one of the kids in the cul-de-sac, Kevin is always his first choice. And he sees the rest of the kids, except for Naz, who he has a crush on, as beneath him.
Naz wants to talk to me.
Sarah and Jimmy are 2 annoying kids, Rolf is an oddball, and Johnny is he's Johnny. This is best shown on display in the episode Once Upon an Ed. Eddie's retelling a story with a fair bit of embellishment, and in said story, Eddie's basically the top guy of the town. Everybody's fawning over him and treating him like he's the best guy in the world. All the kids want to be his friend because he's so darn awesome.
'Cause I love you.
But of course, Eddie won't give them the time of day because they're beneath him. They're the lowlifes, the commoners. He's Eddie. He doesn't need them. All he needs is his vast empire and his superior intellect. Of course, Eddie doesn't have an empire yet, so all he can really rely on is him being superior to everybody else. Even if he doesn't necessarily think that. Let me tell you, the finale changes everything. We see Eddie in a whole new light, and it makes you look back at everything he did and the way he's been acting in all the episodes, and you really start to question, is Eddie really that big of a jerk? Take a look at all those interactions and relationships I told you about. What's the common theme? It's Eddie wanting to be on top, being the dominant force, a sort of leader, if you will.
You're messing with the king here!
And this is all because of one aspect, or more specifically, one person. Eddie's brother. Throughout the entire series, Eddie's been gushing about his brother.
My brother showed me how to make it before he went away. Isn't it beautiful?
My brother does this. My brother has that. My brother's the top guy, and oh, he's just so cool. Oh, and also, we're totally best buds.
Hiya, bro. What's up? It's me, Eddie. All grown up and living the life.
But that's not true. Yeah, maybe Eddie's brother was once the coolest guy in the world, but now he's just some loser working at the carnival. Eddie's never really gonna see him that way though, because ever since he was little, Eddie always wanted to be just like his big brother. Cool and popular and the talk of the town. And the only way to get there was to be just like the guy, which is not really a good thing because Eddie's brother is not a nice person. Eddie grew up around this and saw this as the way to become popular. All he has to do is copy his brother and everybody's gonna love him. Except that's not what happened, is it? It worked for Kevin, but not for Eddie. And even if he doesn't like the other kids in the cul-de-sac, he at least wants their approval. That or their money. Yes, Eddie's most well known in the cul-de-sac for pulling these really elaborate and honestly way too creative for his age scams. Eddie's already an outcast, so he may as well go all the way with it, right? Making as much money off the other kids as he can so that he can buy his #1 favorite snack, Jawbreakers. What's the harm in doing this? Everybody already hates him, so he's not risking his reputation. And besides, this'll help him get a feeling of power. If he can't run the social game of the cul-de-sac, he may as well run the economic one. But we've talked a lot about how Eddie views Kevin and the other cul-de-sac kids, but how does he view his friends? Judging by what I said earlier, it can't be positive at all. Clearly, he treats them with no regard for their own well-being. Except, no, that's not true. Deep down, even though he doesn't want to admit it, Eddie cares a lot about his friends. They're all he really has. With the rest of the cul-de-sac shunning him, he can always look to Ed and Double D for that bit of moral support that he always needed. And even if it doesn't always work, they're always there for each other to lend a helping hand. Like when Ed was feeling down and little Ed blew, Double D and Eddie did whatever they could to cheer him up. Eddie did protest to it, of course, but that's partially because a lot of the things that Double D was having him do were kind of embarrassing, to say the least. Or there's the episode of Fistful of Ed. Double D suddenly becomes the school bully through no fault of his own, and Eddie decides to be his sidekick. Yeah, here he's just kinda leeching off Double D's popularity and power, once again calling back to his desire to be in control and in power. He sees the error of his ways and decides to stand up for Double D when the Canker sisters are sexually assaulting him. Especially considering how selfish Eddie had been in the rest of the episode, that was a really nice moment.
Good one, Eddie.
And of course, we can't talk about Eddie having a softer side without mentioning the finale, Ed, Edd and Eddy's Big Picture Show. There are two moments in particular that I want to highlight. The first one is where it looks like Double D's gonna break off the friendship. He's had it with Eddie's constant scams and getting them in trouble, especially when he didn't do anything really that wrong. And Eddie takes it really hard. First he lashes out in anger, and then he decides to blame himself. He's the reason they're in this mess. He's the reason that they had to flee Peach Creek. And if owning up to his mistakes and making himself look like a failure is what it will take in order to keep his friend, then he's gonna do it. He can't lose Double D, not after all they've been through together. Showing that yes, as hard as Eddie might be on Ed and Double D, he values them a lot. And then there's the moment at the end where Eddie comes clean about how bad of a person his brother is and that all he ever wanted was to be just like him. For the first time in the entire show, Eddie breaks down, and he's 100% vulnerable, taking off all masks of confidence and dominance and aggression, and he's the person that he always was deep down. A sad, lonely kid who just wanted to be loved. And in the end, he finally gets what he wants. Although not in the same way that he was expecting it. He's part of the group now and he's got a bunch of friends. He's just not their end-all be-all Fonz-style leader. and he's cool with it. He doesn't really want that anymore. He wants to belong. And after 6 seasons in a movie, he's finally done it. I think we've all known an Eddie in our life, or maybe we still do now. Someone who puts on a big show and talks the talk, but it's really overcompensating for some massive insecurities. Even if it's not as extreme as what Eddie went through, I think we can relate to him in some way. Who out there doesn't want to belong and try to change themselves to fit in with a certain group? At least when they were younger, because at the Ed's age, what was it, like 14 or something? They're in middle school, so yeah, it all adds up. This is very common. There's a lot of social pressure, and who's cool and who's not stuff going around. It's a mess. And thanks to his no-good brother, Eddie got caught right up in it. But at least we can rest easy knowing that Eddie is no longer the way he used to be. He's now one of the gang, which means that the king of cons has decided to retire. So the cul-de-sac is now safe once again. I had a great time making that Eddie character quest, and it seems like a lot of you had just as much fun watching it. So why not do something very similar? Good old Ed with 1D. Not a very well-rounded character, is he? He's the comedic relief character who's always up to something, but that's about it. Actually, no, that's not it at all. The comedic relief element of Ed's character is only the surface layer. Let's dig a little deeper and see what we can find. To put it simply, Ed has never grown up, and I'm not sure he ever will. Ed is a 7-year-old in a... how old are they again? 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. He's a 7-year-old in one of those ages' bodies. He fears basic hygiene like brushing his teeth or using soap. He loves low-budget monster movies that are full of nothing but mindless violence.
I said quiet!
He adores sugary snacks, and of course, he idolizes his friends and family. Let's start with his friends. Eddie and Double D are basically the entire reason that Ed exists. He wouldn't really get out of bed in the morning if it wasn't for them, partially because he'd be just fine sleeping in bed watching whatever crazy movie's on this week. But he lives and breathes for his 2 buddies. Whatever crazy scheme they get up to, or whatever wild way they try to make some money, Ed is totally on board. Granted, that's also because he has a very loose grasp of what's really going on, partly because to him, Eddie only yells and Double D speaks in science gibberish. But even so, the series makes it clear that he has at least some understanding of what he's doing, even if it is minor. And it's this minor understanding that leads to some of the deeper parts of Ed's character. Think about everyone's roles in the scams that go on in Peach Creek. Eddie's the charismatic frontman, Double D's the one who puts it all together, and Ed essentially does all the odd jobs that neither the other two are willing to do.
Dig a hole, dig a hole, dig a hole, dig a hole. Hey, mole boy!
He plays the most humiliating part, he's given the least interaction with customers, and he does a vast majority of the physical activity. Ed gets stuck with all of the worst jobs, but he doesn't bat an eye. He sees that it makes his friends happy, and therefore, he's happy. This goes all the way back to Bottomless Ed, where Eddie would have Ed eat literal garbage just for a quarter. Did Ed mind? Nope. Not back then, and not now. Ed kind of reminds me of Pinky from Pinky and the Brain. Neither of them are objectively smart, but the one level intelligence that they do have, aside from some niche trivia from some very obscure aspects, is emotional intelligence. They can see quite clearly how other people feel. And at the end of the day, their happiness is derived from their friends. And when this friendship is in jeopardy, or if something comes along to split them up, Ed can't cope. He tends to have the worst reactions. Take, for example, the Back to School episode where all 3 Eds have different homerooms. None of them are happy about this, but Ed takes it the worst. Ed already hates school enough, so naturally taking the 2 things that he looks forward to seeing every day would make it an insufferable experience. Let's face it, he's not gonna make honor roll anytime soon or make any school teams. What else does he have? Or how about Eddie and Double D's big fight in the Big Picture show? While Double D's storming off and Eddie's yelling back, Ed breaks down. He can't cope. Even if he's still got one friend left, he needs that other one to be truly happy. And seeing that one of his friends did something so terrible and effectively betrayed the other, makes Ed feel that all those wild adventures and fun times that they've had before can never happen again. And when everything turns out to be okay in the end, Ed immediately snaps back to happiness. All thoughts of any consequences back home, or the incoming cul-de-sac attackers have completely left his mind. His very little mind. It's all okay. Here and now, he's happy. What more does he need than to be happy? Perhaps the biggest example I can think of is A Fistful of Ed. Here, Double D, through a complicated series of events, is mistaken to be the new school bully. All the other kids, even tough ones like Kevin, cower in fear whenever they see Double D. Double D, of course, would never hurt a fly. But nobody else believes him, especially not Ed's mom.
We are friends no more! My mom says I can't be!
This breaks Ed's heart. All of the previous points I've made can apply here as well, but one thing I'd like to add that I don't really think that a lot of other people talk about is that Ed still didn't give up on Double D when he thought that he became a monster. Neither did Eddie, of course, but Eddie was trying to cash in on Double D's newfound street cred. Ed did not. Sure, he was still afraid of what Double D could do, but he didn't give up on him until he was forced to. I'll bet you're wondering, where does this sense of loyalty come from? Well, the way I see it, there are two sources for this. Firstly, it's his less than average intelligence. Because he's not all that smart, and let's be honest, his brain hasn't fully developed yet, Ed can only process emotions in extremes. He's never just happy, he's ecstatic. He's never just sad, he's heartbroken. And when he gets a pebble in his shoe, he's not just annoyed, he's an untamed beast. And it's this small amount of intelligence that leads to my second point, the one that I made earlier. He's still a kid. Okay, yes, technically all the Ed boys and the other cul-de-sac folks are still kids, but Ed more so. Yes, even more than Jimmy or his sister Sarah.
See? That's my lucky quarter, Sarah.
Jimmy and Sarah are still developed enough to have conversations with each other or take baths, but Ed seems to be permanently trapped in this 7-year-old mindset. One that, while endearing, is very concerning to his family. Oh yeah, that's right. I said I was going to talk about his family earlier, so I guess this is a good enough segue. Ed loves his little sister. His little sister does not love him. It goes without saying that Sarah's a brat and extremely annoying, and most of the other cul-de-sac kids don't exactly care for her antics. The one who should care the least is Ed. She berates him, physically attacks him, constantly tattles on him to their mom, and is generally a constant terror. But despite all of this, and despite fearing her actions, Ed is very protective over his
Baby sister!
Ed can only see Sarah as his sweet little baby sister. Again, much like his friends, as long as she's happy, he's happy. Although this time, it's not just because of secondhand joy. It's also because he doesn't want his life to be a living nightmare. As for his parents, that's something else entirely. We never get to see Mr. and Mrs. Ed on screen, but thankfully we have the series Bible to clear everything up. The main word I would use to describe these two is concerned. They're not really sure that Ed's going down the right path. Mr. Ed, not this Mr. Ed, this Mr. Ed. He's a used car salesman by trade and wants Ed to follow in his footsteps. But, Ed's not really the best salesman or worker in general. So it's up to Mr. Ed to constantly push this onto his son, hoping that maybe, one day, he can be inspired enough to turn his life around.
And Dad will just sit there and watch TV!
As for Mrs. Ed, there's already a lot of implications that she's kind of a neat freak, but she can't stand Ed's hygiene habits. His filthy room, his foul breath, his refusal to even brush his teeth. She constantly begs him to turn things around, but he just won't do it. She also takes a lot of Ed's drawings, Xeroxes them, and sends them to a therapist, hoping that she might be able to crack the code for what makes Ed, Ed. Honestly though, I can kind of see where they're coming from. Yes, Ed's a great guy, he's a lovable doofus, and he's one of the funniest characters on the show. But think about if Ed was real. Or, I guess, a more apt comparison, if you were in Peach Creek. Regardless if you were his friend or part of his family, wouldn't you be concerned for this guy's future? Double D is gonna be just fine. He's a genius. Eddie, while not necessarily a great student, has the gift of gab and he's a real good showman. If he attaches himself to a reputable brand when he's older, he could be Salesman of the Year. As for Ed, his prospects don't look great. If he acts the same way as he did when he was 4, chances are that he might be in some serious trouble. In a lot of cases like Ed's, real life ones that is, parents will usually open up their home to this child, allowing them to have a home forever. Obviously, having cognitive disadvantages like Ed's would make finding employment or a spouse or a place to live on their own just about impossible. But the way that Ed's parents treat him, constantly trying to push Ed's dad's job onto him, and trying to change his behavior without getting to the real root of the problem, I don't think they would let him stay in the house as long as he needs. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they were the parents that, as soon as their kid turned 18, would kick the kid out of the house. Especially if Sarah pushed them to do it. They've always babied and preferred Sarah. Whatever she says goes. So if she wants Ed gone, he could easily be out on the street. But hey, maybe there's a silver lining to all this. It's possible that his friendship with Double D and or Eddie could end up paying off. When they're successful and established on their own, they could have a spare bedroom for Ed.
He is?
And the way I see it, Ed would be just fine with that, because that means no adult responsibilities, no adult expectations, and getting to spend time with his best buddies forever. But hey, I'm reading a little too deeply into this, so let's reel it back. If you've ever wondered what made Ed tick, well, here you go. He's a loyal friend till the end, even if he doesn't really know what he's doing. He's all heart, no brains. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus, and Happy whatever else. Every year I lift my moratorium on taking requests, and I let you guys vote for what I call the gift video, and according to fan demand, the 2023 gift video will be a character quest on Double D from Ed, Edd n Eddy, or as he's more popularly known, Head in Sock Ed Boy. In the cul-de-sac's misfit delinquent group that is the Ed Trio, Double D is the odd Ed out. He's the only one that's not malicious or dangerous, he's relatively socially acceptable, and for the most part, he has a clear vision on what he wants in life, even at this early stage of development. So with all that being said, why does he stick with Ed and Eddie? Well, let me explain. In the group of Eds, Eddie is the mouth. He's the carnival barker for all the scams, and he's the front man whenever the group's in trouble. Ed is the muscle, quite literally, but aside from that, he's the one who does the jobs that the other two Eds don't want to do. As for Double D, he's the brain. He comes up with most of the required contraptions, he's the first one to point out the flaws in Eddie's plans, even though his input is usually ignored, and he's naturally the smartest of the three. And this is how it's been since Double D first moved to the cul-de-sac. As we've seen in a flashback, Ed and Eddie were the first kids he came in contact with, and right away he struck up a friendship, mostly based on the fact that they all have the same name. From that day on, the group was inseparable, despite the fact that one of its members was very different from the other two. Double D will have his occasional moments of being a kid, like obsessing over Jawbreakers or wanting to watch a monster movie, but for the most part, he doesn't have anything in common with his two friends. Whereas they like destruction, mayhem, and causing trouble, Double D is orderly, obsessive-compulsive, and is a people-pleasing doormat. The secret to their friendship, despite all these conflicting differences, is that Double D needs the other two Eds, and the other two Eds need Double D. Think about it this way, with Double D's personality and his lack of a backbone, where would he be in life? Worst case scenario, he'd be the older Jimmy, one who's stuck in their own little world, and is virtually incapable of standing up for himself. The other two Eds give him backbone. They challenge him constantly to stand up for his beliefs. Though it goes without saying that it's not on purpose. Since Ed and Eddie always get Double D in trouble, he has to snap back. If he doesn't fend for himself, nobody will. Do you think that Double D could take Kevin or the Cankers on all by himself? No! He needs somebody strong like Ed or somebody conniving like Eddie to have his back. And besides, they help Double D experience life. Double D's home environment is relatively quiet and sterile. His parents are rarely home, often communicating with him through sticky notes. Every surface in the house has to be scarily clean. Every item has to be meticulously organized, and all of the food has to be overly healthy and bland. Regardless as to whether or not they're present parents, Mr. and Mrs. Double D are not going to be able to provide their son with the childhood he needs. He has to have time to be a kid. He needs some experiences where he breaks some rules, eats a lot of sugar, or scrapes his knee. Thanks to Ed and Eddie, he's got more than enough of these to go around. This is especially important for somebody like Double D because he takes himself way too seriously. For example, in Too Smart for His Own Ed, when Double D is no longer considered the smartest person in school, he shuts down. In his mind, his intellect is his only defining trait. Without being recognized for his academic achievements, he's got nothing going on. That's not exactly a healthy mindset to have, so luckily, he's constantly surrounded by people who remind him, "You're one of us," for better or worse. Even though Ed and Eddie didn't exactly handle that situation well, but this friendship is a two-way street. As much as Double D needs the other two Eds, they need him just as much, if not more. Despite his quirks, Double D is the only member of the Ed trio that's socially accepted. Ed is dumb, loud, brutish, and smells terrible, and Eddie, well, he's the resident hooligan. Nobody wants to get near him. That is until he reforms in Big Picture Show, but we've already discussed that in the past. Whenever the Eds are interacting with the other cul-de-sac kids as a group, they're all hated, but when it's just Double D talking to them, for the most part, they're relatively respectful. Sure, they don't like the people he hangs around with or some of the stuff he gets up to, but at the end of the day, more often than not, they consider him an okay guy. This means that Double D is the only Ed with a real shot at making friends. The other two are hopeless. If they don't want to be alone, they need Double D. Besides, I'm pretty sure that Double D is the only reason that those two aren't dead now, but this also goes for an individual level as well. Double D and Ed are polar opposites. Double D is overly hygienic. Ed is afraid of soap. Double D has a fascination with the finer things in life, and Ed rots his mind with mindless movies. Double D is intelligent, and Ed is Ed. You see where I'm going with this, right? There needs to be a yin to every yang. Double D keeps Ed out of trouble, somewhat, ensures his safety, again, somewhat, and is there to pick up the pieces of his broken life. Ed's household is not exactly the healthiest. He has a negligent mother, a father who wants to force him to follow in his footsteps, and an abusive sister. They're not going to look out for Ed. All they want to do is either scold him or quote-unquote fix him. Well, yes, Double D does try to set Ed on a better path. He does so in a loving way, and one that Ed is more likely to respond to. Some would consider Ed a lost cause, but Double D will never give up on him, which is more than I can say for Ed's own family. As for Eddie, this guy needs a friend, period. If it wasn't for Double D being the mediator between him and Ed, I don't know how much longer Ed would stick around if he wasn't so blindly loyal. Let's face it, Eddie doesn't exactly treat the big lug with much respect. And even though Eddie would vehemently deny this, he wants more out of friendship than just a goon to boss around. If he was stuck with Ed and Ed alone, he would be the loneliest boy in the cul-de-sac. Besides, if Eddie wants to get anywhere with his scams, he needs somebody like Double D. All Eddie is an idea guy. Not the monsters that brainwashed Chris Chan, that's another subject. But all he can do is come up with a concept. He needs a brainiac like Double D to help put everything together. Otherwise, he's just going to be stuck with scams like Bottomless Ed, and while that might have worked when they were all little, I don't see that keeping its effectiveness in junior high. Even if sometimes Double D objects to these scams, they still bolster Eddie's intellectual side, and to Double D, that's one of the most important things one friend can do for another. Eddie has a gift. He's a natural salesman, so if someone helps him pursue this talent, there's no telling what he can do when he's an adult. And the only person who's able to bring that out of Eddie is Double D. Now, this wouldn't be a complete analysis of Double D if we didn't include one of the most infamous aspects to his role in the show. And no, I'm not talking about what's under the hat, Siamese twin! I'm talking about the fact that whenever the group as a whole gets punished, even when Double D didn't do anything wrong, he's always there to receive punishment along with Ed and Eddie. Many fans of Ed, Edd, and Eddy have decried these moments, saying that they're mean-spirited and undeserved. And, well, kind of, yeah, I think they're important. They speak volumes to Double D's character. Remember earlier when I said that Double D could make friends with the cul-de-sac kids if he was out on his own? Keep that in mind when he's being punished at the end of these episodes. At a moment's notice, he could denounce Ed and Eddy, say that he's done with their wicked ways, and go join the other kids. He'd have more intellectually stimulating conversations, he'd be regularly involved in the group's activities, and generally speaking, he would have many more friends that could be just as close as he was to the other Eds. But as present as that opportunity may be, he won't take it. They've been friends for so long. Why should he give up on them? Especially when he needs them and they need him. In a life as boring as Double D's, friends are all he has. Remember that episode of Fistful of Ed when everyone's convinced that Double D becomes the school bully? He's generally upset that his reputation has taken a nosedive and that everybody's afraid of him, but what really breaks his heart is when Ed breaks the friendship off. Despite all of the things that Ed has put Double D through, and despite all of the germs that he's been exposed to because of Ed, Double D wants his friend back first and foremost. And even in the big picture show when it looks like he finally gives up on Eddy, Eddy giving one sincere apology is enough to turn everything back around. When it comes to these two, Double D can't hold a grudge. They're together forever. Especially since Ed probably doesn't have any prospects of having a career or, hate to say it, living alone. I know it's a cliched phrase, but Double D is the glue that holds this group together. And luckily for him, his loyalty was rewarded. He was able to grow a backbone after standing up to Eddy, and the Eds were officially absorbed into the cul-de-sac group, so his number of official friends just skyrocketed. And here's hoping that as the years go on, this new batch of friends will be able to teach Double D some new lessons and vice versa. After all, he's got a pretty impressive resume of doing exactly that during his role as the odd Ed out. When you think of the best Cartoon Network show, what pops into your mind? I mean, aside from Mike Luanog, because, let's face it, that's cheating. As we've previously determined in this video right here. But aside from Mike Luanog, or as I call it, the pinnacle of human greatness, the best Cartoon Network show could arguably be something like Adventure Time, or Regular Show, or Gumball, or whatever this is. Personally though, I'd have to say that it's Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Now I know that's a safe choice, but it's a safe choice for a reason. This show is really freaking good. Of course, all the reasons why it's so good have been hammered into the ground for who knows how long. So I'm not necessarily gonna discuss that here today. I'm gonna talk about something entirely different. Objectively speaking, who is the best Ed? I've just gone through a ton of episodes of this show, and I've come up with a firm conclusion. So let's take a look at which one's the best. Is it Ed, Edd, or Eddy? Well, I hate to give away the ending right in the beginning, thereby making it not the ending, but the beginning. It really depends on what you're looking for because each of the Eds offer something unique for a completely different audience. If you like the wacky screwball characters who are a laugh a minute, then you're gonna like Ed the best. Ed is a complete marvel. He is the typical stupid idiot character who can't get anything right, but he's never annoying. He's always endearing and basically always funny. And for years, I've been trying to figure out why exactly that is. How can Ed work when the likes of, say, Cosmo and the later Fairly Odd Parents, or any of these characters on screen, all fail? Well, I think I finally figured out the reason after all this time, and it's because there's a logic to Ed's stupidity. He's not so much dumb, okay, well he is dumb, but it kind of comes from him still being a little kid at heart. He loves nothing more than TV and junk food and not being clean. Everything that a stereotypical little boy loves, Ed loves, and then some, like chicks.
Ed's been holding out on us. Chicks galore, huh?
All of the little silly things that Ed says like,
Those aren't rabbits, those are bunnies.
or the classic,
I'm a woodpecker. Except with dirt.
those all come from a state of childlike innocence. So Ed's a lot more than the comic relief of the show, he's the soul of the main trio. Whenever Eddy's being nasty and greedy and Double D's yapping about whatever, Ed's always there to lighten the mood because he doesn't know any better. That's kind of what he does. Life is supposed to be one big thrill that always puts you in your happy place. And if it doesn't, well, then panic ensues. Personally speaking, I really wish a lot more idiot characters would be like Ed. They can be stupid, they can be silly, they can cause some trouble, but they have to have a reason for it. Otherwise, they're like, say, Captain Hero and Drawn Together Season 3 where, her-de-dur, he's stupid, and that's all there is. That's why we're able to care about Ed, and that's why he's the best choice for someone who's more comedically minded. When you're the best in your field, you're gonna get recognized for it. Luckily, Ed has gotten all the attention he deserves and more. And if you want to know how he turned out this way, blame his parents. He says so. I don't know if this is still a thing, but one of the main complaints that cartoon reviewers would throw out in the early to mid 2010s is that something is mean-spirited or nasty or something like that. I don't really think people say that anymore, because it's kinda gotten old and it's a blanket term and, that's not really what this video's about. But that got me thinking. In a world where people are so concerned with something seeming mean-spirited or vile, they need somebody to root for. They need somebody to relate to. Otherwise, it's all gonna crash and burn. That's why there was such a big outrage against the episodes of SpongeBob seasons 6 through 9. I mean, yeah, we had Squidward, but we always knew that he was just gonna get kicked around for no good reason. If you want to see the season 6 through 9 Squidward done right, then look no further to our next Ed, Double D. Double D caters more towards the crowd that wants to root for somebody. Whether it be the underdog or an upstanding character or the voice of reason, if you want to root for a character to come out on top, even if you don't really believe that they're gonna do it, then Double D is the one for you. What I like about Double D is that even though he objects to a lot of what Eddie does and to some of what Ed does, he's still their good and loyal friend. He's not gonna give up on them for better or for worse. In fact, they probably wouldn't get anywhere without him. Another thing that sets him apart is that no matter how badly Eddie treats him, he's not scared of him. Never. He's not really intimidated in the slightest. He's able to give wisecracks and sarcastic comments right back at him. That level of equal footing helps make Double D who he is. Otherwise, he'd be just another Squidward or Meg Griffin, a beaten-down whipping mule who never gets what they want and never succeeds. Who wants to watch a character like that? But of course, I have to address the elephant in the room. The fact that half the time, even though he doesn't really do anything wrong, Double D gets punished along with Eddie and Ed. One of the main examples of this is the episode For Your Ed Only. For context, Eddie ends up stealing Sarah's diary and reads through it. Meanwhile, the rest of the cul-de-sac kids are desperately trying to get it back. As expected, Double D wants to bring it back like any good Samaritan would do. But of course, he's the one who gets caught with the diary. So he, Ed, and Eddie are all stuck in this giant pile of gum in Ed's room. Along with Johnny and Plank, but that's a completely different story that we're not going to go over here. Or how's about the infamous, if it smells like an Ed? Despite the fact that Eddie was the one who gave Jimmy the wedgie, Double D and Ed are punished alongside Eddie. But I also feel the need to say that, yes, a lot of the time Double D's punishments are deserved. One little touch I do like though is that even though he does go along with Eddie's schemes, sometimes he has a little bit of a different angle. Like in Wish You Were Ed when Rolf wants to go back to his home country, Double D fully goes along with Ed's scam and even does take money from Rolf. Though, admittedly, the main reason he did go along with it in the first place was to not only help Rolf feel better, but also to indulge in the homeland culture. Or there's Fa-La-La-La Ed, where he almost breaks Jimmy's piggy bank and steals the money, then feels terrible about it for the rest of the act. Ed probably wouldn't know what he was doing, and Eddie's just Eddie. So in scenarios like these, it's always good to have someone with not just a brain, but a heart as well. Man, the Tin Man and Scarecrow must really hate this guy. Then that brings us to Eddie. How could somebody possibly think that Eddie was the best character in the show? How can Eddie be someone's favorite Ed? Well, let me tell you, because he's personally my favorite Ed. Eddie is for people who like to dissect characters. Eddie is probably the most complex character in the entire show. Though that's not saying much given the fact that there's no real deep backstories in here and there's, 9 characters in the show in total. Unless you count Wilfred, but that's cheating, he's god tier. Eddie is a guy who just wants to feel like he belongs. He wants to seem big, tough, and important like his older brother. But in doing so, he goes a little bit too overboard and scares most everybody away. Unless you're a canker or your name is Ed, you're gonna want to stay as far away from Eddie as possible. And he knows it. Even so, he doesn't want it to be evident that it bothers him, so he tries to put on a mask. Again, and again, and again. Now looking back after watching Big Picture Show, whenever I see Eddie act out, I more see him as a guy who's pretending to be a big shot rather than someone who actually is one. Despite all the yelling and abuse and greed, he's just a sad, lonely, hurting man. Even though he pushes Ed and Double D around, they still mean a lot to him. He's just got a short fuse, so he can't really show it so easily. Yeah, Eddie can be obnoxious and unpleasant sometimes, but he always gets what's coming to him. And besides, when you consider the deeper character within, it makes it a lot more fun. So if you like to quote-unquote do your homework while you watch the show, this is the perfect character for you. He's someone to dissect and pick apart. As you do so, your understanding of him grows and therefore your connection to him does alongside it. Once again, he pales in comparison to Wilfred. Wilfred makes the show. Him and Plank. Those two are unstoppable. How come we never got that spin-off? I would have loved to see the Wilfred and Plank adventures. Come on, make it happen. In all seriousness, I think I've just about covered everything I can here. If you want a lovable character who's gonna make you roll on the floor laughing, Ed is your guy. If you want someone to root for when the going gets tough, then you gotta go with Double D. But if you're the kind of person who likes to pick apart a show and analyze every single little piece until reality breaks, then the choice is clear. Eddie is the one for you. So comment below and let me know which Ed you think is the best. What kind of viewer are you? And you too want to see the Wilfred and Plank adventures like everybody else does? Maybe sometime I'll talk about the other characters of Ed and Eddie, but probably not. There's not really much to go off of with them, and there's so many other ideas we have. Still though, it was nice to talk about this amazing show, and do it in a way that I don't think anyone else has done before either. So thanks for watching everyone, I'll see you guys next time!